Israel W. Charny, Director, Institute on the Holocaust and Genocide, Jerusalem.
And can you tell us a little bit about your life from your family and where your family came from?
A little bit. Father from Russia, mother from Poland. Mother, I was always so proud of her, was a student at the Sorbonne, early 1920s. They married in Paris and immigrated to the United States in the early 20s.
And where were you born?
I was born in Brooklyn, New York. I can say that in a Brooklyn accent. And then at the merry age of 1, mother, my older brother, and myself went to a funny place called Tel Aviv and lived there for 3 years.
And what year was this?
1931 is my birth. 1932 we moved to Tel Aviv. Father, in Depression years, remains in the United States to make a living. And we returned to the United States in 1935.
Do you remember anything from those early years in Tel Aviv?
Yes. After many tens of thousands of dollars spent on psychoanalysis, I recovered memories. I remember the house vividly. And a couple of weeks ago, a good friend of mine here in Jerusalem, it turns out that his aunt was the owner of the grocery store right across the street that we would shop in and that I would look at from our second floor balcony, and where we would buy, as I remember as a kid, Quaker oats.
Do you remember growing up in Brooklyn in the late 1930s?
Yes.
What are your recollections?
The Iceman cometh. The coal being delivered down the chute to the basement, the mystery of the basement, that black hole, the simplicity of life in homes, separate homes, and the Brooklyn Public Library, my savior, my delight, my home.
And what high school did you go to?
I had attended a yeshiva, a Jewish day school in Brooklyn. And when I graduated there, I went to the high school of the Yeshiva University in Upper Manhattan.
And did you go to college in New York?
No. I went to college for 1 year at Yeshiva University, including a marvelous creative writing course. And then I broke with my assigned future and told my rabbi father that I was leaving yeshiva and that I was going to a university in Philadelphia, Temple University. My father screamed, "I won't give you a penny." I said, "Thank you. That makes the move that much more meaningful. I will support myself," and I did. Through the one profession I could have, I taught Hebrew in the afternoons.
And what did you study in college?
I studied psychology.
As an undergraduate?
As an undergraduate.
And
minored in philosophy and sociology.
And did you do graduate work?
Yes, I did a PhD in clinical psychology for 5 years at the University of Rochester. Magnificent training.
And what was your trajectory of your profession? What were you intending to be?
I was intending to be what half of me very, very much is to this very day, a practicing psychotherapist.
And did you have a practice in psychotherapy? In the United States?
Yes, for many years.
Where was it?
Paoli, Pennsylvania. Paoli is the first major stop on the Pennsylvania Railroad on the line going to Lancaster to Harrisburg, a suburban town. I lived 10 miles away in the woods with a Hebrew-speaking dog, and my practice was in Paoli with some affiliations with hospitals and university in Philadelphia itself.
Are you married?
I am married.
Do you have children?
We have children from 2 marriages. Both of us were married earlier. We have been married for well over 30 years. We have 6 children and 13 grandchildren.
So tell me about your family, especially your brother.
My brother's first name was Carmy. Beautiful Hebrew name. One of the worst moments in his childhood life was when the Brooklyn Public Library sent him a postcard about an overdue book addressed to Miss Carmy Charny. He went bananas. When Carmy was 16, I remember vividly one morning he woke up, his hair flying, his face intensely transported. What's wrong? I've decided what I'm going to be. I'm going to be a Hebrew poet. He took as his literary name T, standing for the sound Charny in Hebrew, where it was spelled Tet-Shin, T. Carmy, and he's known by that name. For example, a Penguin book of Hebrew verse, Hebrew and English, and many, many books of Hebrew poetry here in Israel, and also translations of Shakespeare into Hebrew, including, as an example, Hamlet, and his translation is still being used in an excellent Hamlet that is being performed year after year these days in Israel.
How did he get back to Israel?
Carmy graduated college pretty much at the end of World War II. He was slated to go to Columbia University for graduate work in English literature. Instead, he went to France to work with Jewish orphans from the Holocaust. One of the kids in the next door cabin was Elie Wiesel. He did that for a year, came back briefly to the United States, and then left for Israel to do graduate work at the Hebrew University in Jerusalem. The United Nations in November declared partition.
1947.
1947. The war broke out. Carmy joined the Haganah and fought in the war.
And how did you get to Israel?
I got to Israel because I knew I wanted to live in Israel. But I went the simple way of doing all of my training in the United States and a good number of years of postdoctoral practice. But I planned a target date. For a good number of years, I would bring my young family to Israel for 6 weeks. And one of the last times, we bought a piece of land in Herzliya. I contracted with a local builder who turned out to be an excellent ethical guy, and a house went up. The following summer, the house frame was finished. We came and we camped on the cement floors. The workers were astounded at Americans who would live in that kind of down-to-earth cement way, and they really got to work and finish the house.
And what year was this?
And we arrived the following year, 1973, to live here.
Before the war.
A few months before the war, literally.
And what did you do in Tel Aviv?
In Tel Aviv, I started my private practice of psychotherapy. My first patient was an unbelievable case of a man who went into a panic in the Yom Kippur War. He was in his 40s. He had been a soldier in the War of Independence. How many years earlier? 25 years earlier. He had carried with him what we call today a post-traumatic neurosis. He had more EKG examinations than any living human being without a single finding. He was forever feeling that he's going down. He now went into a panic in his middle age. The world is coming to an end. I treated him. We reconstructed the critical event when the shell exploded in the War of Independence and killed his buddy next to him, and he survived. Worked through the guilt, worked through the symptoms. I started my practice, and I became a professor at Tel Aviv University.
And how long did you do the teaching at Tel Aviv University?
For a good 20 years, and then I was invited by Hebrew University to develop a new program, a postgraduate program, postgraduate training, advanced training in integrative psychotherapy for people with master's and doctoral degrees.
So tell me how you get from being a psychotherapist in Tel Aviv to being the executive director of Holocaust and Genocide Studies.
How do I get from being a psychotherapist to being the director of an institute on Holocaust and Genocide? I don't move away from being a psychotherapist. I continue all these years half and half. But it starts with a dream. 5 years after my PhD, I was eligible for the highest level of professional accreditation in the United States as a board clinical psychologist. Lots of testing. Paper, people, demonstrate your work at a hospital in a city other than where you live. I got it. I am a specialist in human behavior with the finest training that America gives. Feels good. I go to sleep, I have a dream. I wake up from the dream with a question burning in me. How the hell did they do what they did to our people in the Holocaust? How could they kill the way they did? I knew from then I hadn't had any training whatsoever in those days in any aspect of human violence. I had absolutely no training in this ugly, vicious side of humanity, which is unbearably common, of a readiness to commit mass murder. I knew I had a lifetime job of study ahead of me, and I embarked on it, forgive me, happily.
What year was this?
1965.
And do you remember the steps from 1965 to the founding of the first institute?
I do. I gave a lecture on teaching the violence of the Holocaust at Gratz College, Philadelphia, and published it in a Jewish educator's journal, Jewish Education. But more importantly, I gathered together a group of colleagues from a variety of professions. couple of Christian ministers, a rabbi, president of a college, psychologists, psychiatrists, educators, sociologists, a director of theater, and with zero budget, with zero practical end-gaining goals, we created a study group. We met once a month regularly at my office. Each time one or two guys, gals would present a seminar discussion, and we would all learn together. For example, the one that I did was with the director of theater. And the question we raised is, how do you make it more possible for people to bear listening, reading, maintaining their attention to news of atrocities? The normal attention span is short, and then comes a cutout, because it's unbearable. That's what we worked on. I did that for a few years. Then the American Orthopsychiatric Association invited me to become chairman of something called a task force on mental health aspects of aggression, violence, and war. And that meant at every annual meeting, I was authorized to invite a fair number of outstanding scholars from the various fields to present, and I invited the people I wanted to learn from. We had one session after another. One year I had the privilege of bringing a talk from an Israeli psychiatrist who, together with his wife, psychologist, had been the two mental health people who conducted a formal examination of Eichmann while he was in prison. There's also a funny story I can tell quickly. He would disappear from his office at Tel Aviv Hospital, and people started asking, where is Shlomo? Shlomo Kulchar, Hungarian Israeli psychiatrist. We don't know. Week after week, he was going to Eichmann. Finally, somebody said, don't you know? He's being called out to take care of the old man. They meant by that David Ben-Gurion, that he was secretly treating him, which he wasn't. When I moved to Israel, I planned to work on the psychology of genocide. I spent 10 years writing a book called How Can We Commit the Unthinkable, published by Westview Press. It includes chapters on perpetrators, victims, and bystanders. What I did is I took months where every day I'd wake up, no telephone calls, no work, and I would do a Stanislavski psychodrama. I played the role in my head of a victim in the Holocaust. I put myself in scene after scene of the victim's experiences. When that period was over, I moved to the bystander role. And for a good number of months, I stood and watched and saw what they were doing to the inmates. And then came the months devoted to putting on a Nazi uniform in my head and the boots and being an SS perpetrator. And I did it step after step. During that period, I had one anxiety attack after another, which I accepted as part of the price for meeting up with that part of potential in my personality, in a human personality, The book also has a chapter which introduced for the first time the concept of a genocide early warning system. I wrote that chapter with my colleague Hanan Rappaport, who was then the director of the Zold National Institute for Research in the Behavioral Sciences in Jerusalem. Hanan and I met probably for 7 years, every Sunday, a nice chicken dinner that his wife would prepare, and then we worked for 4 or 5 hours into the evening until we got it. I was now in business. The book was finished, it was accepted for publication. I had just finished organizing and leading an international family therapy conference, Back to Psychotherapy, and I decided I wanted to organize a first international conference on the Holocaust and Genocide. We're in 1979 now. Conference is slated for 1982. We started with no list of professionals. There was nobody in the world in any organized way, in any organization. We assembled them, the people who had conveyed interest in various aspects of Holocaust and genocide. We worked on that for 3 years. It's during those years that we incorporated the Institute on the Holocaust and Genocide legally in Israel. The 3 founders were my colleague, psychiatrist, who was director of Shalvata Psychiatric Center, Shammai Davidson, who was a devoted therapist for Holocaust survivors, Elie Wiesel, and myself. We're the 3 signatories. We're headed for the conference. In 1982, Amnesty International, which I believe quite recently at that point had been awarded the Nobel Prize after its questionable, shaky beginnings, was headed by a fine man called Martin Ennals. Martin Ennals wanted Amnesty to take on not only prisoners of conscience, but the subject of genocide. He invited the 3 living people who had written books on genocide by 1982. Irving Lewis Hurwitz, president of and publisher Transaction Books, Leo Cooper, professor of sociology, University of California, a South African in origin, and myself to a conference in Amsterdam. Amnesty declined to take on genocide. Martin Ennals, who had led them to the Nobel Prize, resigned and took on the development of a totally new organization under the tutelage of Leo Cooper. The organization was called International Alert, and it was to alert to the scourge of genocide. I come back to Israel from Amsterdam. The chairman of my department at Tel Aviv University meets me and says, "Boy, are you in trouble?" I say, "Why?" He says, "Come on, I'll tell you." The Jerusalem Post ran a story in April 1982 about the forthcoming first international conference on the Holocaust and Genocide, and told that the conference will be devoted to the Holocaust and any number of other genocides, name them, including the unmentionable for certain people, the Armenian genocide. All hell broke loose. Turkey made representations to Israel. You can't do this. Israel, as has been her wrong policy for many years, went along with Turkey in the interests of the realpolitik of maintaining relationships with Turkey, and brought pressure on me to remove the 6 lectures on the Armenian genocide out of 300 that were scheduled. We're now in April. The conference is scheduled for June. Shammai, Eli, Wiesel stood with me. We absolutely refused. The Israeli government increased the pressure enormously through the university on me. Tel Aviv University was supposed to be one of the co-sponsors. The rector pulled out. Through contacting everybody who was on the preliminary program we had published, which was a large number of people, 300 lectures, contacting them all around the world, saying the Israeli government wishes that you not attend this conference. I refused to yield to that pressure. Eli Wiesel resigned as the president of the conference, but he accompanied it with giving an interview to the New York Times in Paris, where he told the story. I was not allowed to tell the story because it included threats by Turkey against Jewish lives in Turkey. People were coming to Israel through Turkey, and I couldn't tamper with that. Eli told the story. The New York Times then called me, and I answered in my kitsch way, the conference will go on even if we have only 10 attendees. The government pulled out Yad Vashem where we were supposed to begin. We instead opened at the Hilton Hotel. Our opening speaker disappeared, as did about 35% of the key leaders I had designated for the conference. But everybody else held on. We opened at the Hilton Hotel. I gave a full briefing of the background story. By then, the New York Times had covered the story with 6 or 7 stories. We opened, and now the Israeli press, which had been subject to censorship, came into the picture. They knew what was going on. They reported, and there were many editorial columns supporting us, which led to my boss, rector at Tel Aviv University, becoming infuriated because they criticized him and they praised us for what we were doing. The conference was a milestone event. It's been written up in the academic literature as a significant event in academic freedom. I went broke in the process. Israel had pulled out the monies. For example, I had one check from a foundation in New York for $10,000. And for those who know Israeli life in those days, I had gone to the bank, deposited it to our account, and you then had to wait several weeks for it to get cleared. By time the clearing was supposed to take place, the Israeli government had gotten the donor to cancel the gift. We didn't have money. The Congress organizer, Kenneth, in Tel Aviv, was beautiful. Pitched in, gave us free coffee, reduced prices here and there. The Hilton cost a few $1,000s a day. We went ahead, we made it. I survived the cancellation of many of my insurance policies because I didn't have money left. We made it through, I got the money back. We now opened the Institute on the Holocaust and Genocide. End of beginning story.
What is genocide?
Genocide is a rotten act of killing masses of other unarmed human beings. There are a lot of serious considerations in law, also by any number of social scientists. Do they have to plan it beforehand? Do they have to intend to kill everybody? If they leave one community alive in Bialystok, aha, then it's not genocide because they didn't kill all the Jews. If they let the Hungarian Jews go, if they only kill 1/3 of the nation, I don't agree with any of those stipulations, limitations. They should be recorded as facts. There are degrees of intentionality. There are degrees of extermination. They are a vital part of the historical record. They're a vital part of the legal record. Crimes vary in intensity, just like murders, first, second, third degree. I firmly believe genocide is the murder of any group of unarmed human beings. Usually the designations are familiar ones in terms of the human mind's prejudice. That religion, that race, that ethnicity, that nationality. But the human mind is capable of any kind of, and I'm not allowed to use bad words on camera, but put one in for me. It can make anybody ostensibly a part of a them, another group who are worthless, they're animals, they're bacteria, they're scum, they have to be eliminated, they're going to kill us, we've got to kill them before they kill us. And you have any number of instances where genocide is not nationality, religion, what have you, polity number one killing another one, but where it is the same people who in process create a designation which makes them absolute victims. And we are the desired super race. For example, Cambodia. Who killed? Cambodians. Who were killed? Cambodians. Was there any differentiating biological, ethnic, religious identity? Absolutely not. These became part of the Khmer Rouge madness. These were the outsiders. You wear glasses, the man people don't see interviewing me on camera. You could be eliminated just for that, let alone me. After saying a few words, I'm an intellectual, right? Intellectuals are Royce. Down they go. China. Mao Zedong is understood to have murdered 36 million Chinese. Were they different than the Chinese who murdered them? No. None of the identifying characteristics that make life easier for us, Nazis killing Jews, Serbs killing Bosnian Muslims. None of that. It's a political, strategic, structural process where these get defined as the enemies with all the appellations of dehumanized nothingness, worthless and dangerous. You always find the combination, worthless and dangerous. That's the lethal, toxic combination for genocide. Rwanda, that's an interesting one because you ostensibly have a differentiation, Hutu and Tutsi. But the scholars tell us that that differentiation didn't really exist. It was contrived during the Belgian colonization of Rwanda. the people were so much of the same that there were many families that had both Hutu and Tutsi in them. The Hutu and Tutsi lived with one another in communities. But now, the basic dimension of the Rwandan genocide is Hutu kill Tutsi. You can create it at the drop of a hat. The illness, the monster is genocide, not standard prejudices, which are horrible and are a basis for genocide, but the development of prejudices, which means that you and I as human beings, it's time for us to know that we not only get all sorts of diseases like cancer, that we are subject to a terrible disease of the human mind and spirit, that many of us, millions of us, are capable of getting into a definition of ex-others who wear glasses, who have this kind of sexual orientation, who are just chosen politically and define them as worthless and deserving of being killed. And millions of us get into being able to pull that goddamn trigger. Is there a distinction between the Holocaust and genocide? Yes, no. All genocides have in common the ultimate basic fact that masses of human beings, unarmed human beings, are being murdered in a variety of horrible ways. In a way, every event of genocide has unique features to it. The Armenian genocide is the first grand, organized, state-sponsored genocide of several peoples. The Armenians had co-victims that people often do not know about, the Assyrians, the Greeks. There are also smaller numbers of other peoples, like the Yazidis. These people were murdered. It's like Simon Wiesenthal said about the Roma, the gypsies, who were in the next door building to him in Auschwitz. He saw them taken to their death in the same gas ovens that our people were taken to. It's genocide, it's murder. Are there unique elements to the Holocaust with some qualities of specialness among the different kinds of uniqueness? Yes, absolutely. The style of organization, the efficiency by a very advanced people, the use of science and technology, the firebranded conviction to exterminate, create a unique sequence. The gas chambers, a unique way of collective murder. And in history, the Holocaust achieved a long-needed purpose. Genocide has been going on in the human race since the time we landed on Earth. We haven't had a name for it. We didn't have a concern about it. It was like a line of information in the history books that are boringly studied in order to pass your exams. Human civilization, human spirits had not focused on this enormous crime of crimes. The Holocaust was such an overwhelming event, including that juxtaposition of an advanced people, advanced in literature, in arts, in science, being the vicious perpetrators of the genocide. That civilization was shocked, rocked into awareness. Right now, America is rocked into awareness after so many mass killings of kids by lone gunmen who go out crazily and destroy. But the one that just took place in Newton, Connecticut, passes every conceivable boundary. Little kids of 6 and 7, 20 of them, 6 other people. America is in shock. Thank God America is in shock, because the illness of mass murdering by loners, by nutheads in America is a serious problem, and it has not been faced by American culture. I personally think it will be a test of American civilization's ability to survive. The Holocaust rocked the world into an awareness that we are a genociding species and many things have to be done. That's its uniqueness. The murdering of the Holocaust is absolutely the same in its intrinsic meanings for the victims, for their families, for their peoples. People are being destroyed.
How do you move from being a scholarly institute of Holocaust and genocide studies to an activist with genocide prevention now as a vehicle for understanding how to stop future genocides?
How do you move from scholarship, from learning, studying about genocide, to efforts to think, plan, do things about preventing genocide in the real world? There are lots of analogies, like in medicine. You start by tracking a disease. This is the way it begins. This is the way it progresses. That's what happens. Now, what happens if we introduce hot baths and aspirin, antibiotics, and so forth? The same pattern has taken place for us, for the field of genocide studies. In 1985, we undertook to publish the first international newsletter about genocide. We made a rule for ourselves that we would not start unless we had the sponsorship of some 5 different, let's use one word, ethnicities. Because there was nothing in the world that represented peoples coming together. There were organs of individual peoples speaking of their genocide, like the Holocaust, like the Armenian genocide. There was nothing of people speaking of genocide to all peoples. We did it. We distributed that word-processed magazine. I would carry the hundreds of copies to the post office, became buddies with the postmaster, and we'd stamp away, and it went out to any number of countries in the world. I also got hell one day. A man called and identified himself as a significant executive at Yad Vashem, and he was furious because our word processor, we didn't have fonts in those days, we had one dedicated machine. Our word processor was turning out T's that looked like a cross, and for him that was a blasphemous act for Jews in the land of Israel. We did that for 10 years with many, many issues. Years later, the time had come with the world full of websites, for us to move to a new publication format, but by now we were moving conceptually increasingly towards not only studying, but towards engaging the terrible questions of how do you prevent genocide, how do you respond to genocide? Should the world be responding to what's happening in Syria now? Is there a sane way to respond when it's no longer, quote, simply a revolution against a tyrannical regime, but it already has fundamentalist Islamic Al-Qaeda forces playing a major part in the revolution, and after that planning to go on in their worldwide terrorist campaign? Should the world intervene in Sudan, where killing continues to go on now, year after year? Thousands of people are dying, thousands of people are without homes as the winter comes on. We think, talk, prevention now. We're at the beginning. Like in medicine, when we were at the beginning of treatments of cancer. Cancer isn't over yet, but there is huge progress. Thousands of people are living with cancers that used to kill them. We now have a range of beginning techniques for prevention. The legal area is one major arena where there has been significant progress. It's not enough, but we now have courts that we never had before. International courts in The Hague, international courts set up by the United Nations for the after the fact of the genocides in Rwanda and Yugoslavia. We now have people going to jail for having led genocides, for having been accomplices to genocide. That's a beginning there. We have an enormous increase in information journalistically, tracking many events that absolutely disappeared into the back pages. We have people all over the world who express care and who contribute to campaigns for relief funds, for example, to Sudan. We also have millions of people who've contributed funds to Sudan, and the funds have done nothing because we are still at a very elementary beginning point, but we are beginning to do prevention. Genocide Prevention Now, the web magazine, GPN, that our institute created 3 years ago, purposely highlights the concept of prevention in its title. The issue we just published yesterday has 3 major pieces by outstanding scholars on concepts of prevention in the legal system, in the political system. We also have the uncanny event that one genocide scholar who simply couldn't take it anymore, what's happening in Sudan, Professor Samuel Totten, University of Arkansas, is right now in Sudan with several thousand tons of relief food because he couldn't stand anymore putting out the many books he puts out and the many articles he publishes, including in our web magazine, and he's there with his life on the line.
So tell me, if you were trying to advise a college professor, college student, a high school teacher, a high school student, about how genocide prevention can be done, what would you personally tell them?
What would I tell a college student who wanted to participate? His heart has risen to a wish to do something about genocide. Which path can I go on? The student is asking. there are today paths there never were, including, for some, going and studying the subject itself. There are now many master's programs. There are undergraduate programs, there are master's programs, Holocaust and Genocide, human rights and genocide in the United States, in Europe. There's one program in Europe which involves a joint program of 4 universities, United Kingdom, Poland, Italy, Germany. Beautiful. There's one PhD program at this time, an excellent one at Clark University in the United States, which has already turned out a good number of full-blown professionals for this field. And there are always possibilities of doing a PhD in a known scholarly track like history, like sociology, like psychology, like philosophy, focusing on aspects of genocide with professors who are involved in that subject. But there are also many other opportunities. One can become a professional, a physician, a sociologist, whatever profession. There are contributions that each professional can make to the subject of genocide. You can study international law and develop a specialty in reparations, a specialty in negotiation for prevention of genocide. You can be a physician and you can concentrate on developing humanitarian tools for bringing medical relief to victims of genocide in so many places in the world. All the professions have roles to play and are beginning to play such roles on the scene.
But how do we take someone who is not going to go professionally into this? How do we create a human spirit that will not be allowing genocides to occur? How do we train ourselves as human beings to not allow genocide in the world? The human spirit. How do we train the human spirit to not allow genocide?
How do we train the human spirit not to allow genocide? Some people have a gift. It comes up spiritually inside of them. But I, for some years now, am proposing the creation of a new worldwide campaign to teach and reinforce in all cultures the sacredness of human life. I propose, for example, that the leaders of many different religions join together. I propose that they in turn join with the best folk singers and the sports heroes of a given culture and military heroes of a given culture and political leaders in what I call a worldwide campaign for life. I have suggested that such an organizational structure could be begun by bringing together the victims of genocides of several peoples, no longer in separate organizations for their nationality, but together, creating an organization for protecting human life. I call it R2L, standing for right to life. It follows on a concept that has achieved intellectually significance in the last 5 or so years, called R2P, right to protection, which in short is revolutionary for countries. It used to be no country may intervene in another country's behaviors. R2P, which is becoming legally adopted by any number of bodies, says that if any given country sees in another country mass murder is taking place, and that country is doing it or will not stop it, that there is a right, in fact, an obligation for other countries and for international bodies to go to intervene. R2L, I propose to be a worldwide campaign led by the United Nations, by international businesses, using the best public relations, entertainment, educational techniques in the mass media, with songs for life. You imagine your best baseball player, your best soccer player, your fine, outstanding physician who created a cure for some disease, your military hero, and they stand together and they lead us. The producers and the artists of this world know how to do it. In one culture after another, not a once a year telethon, but a repeated program with short and long messages to the world in every language, in every culture, not for 1 year, over a period of, say, 10 years. Message, it's time to really respect human life and not to kill. Will that influence people? The answer certainly is it will influence a lot of people, because you can sell anything using those techniques. And this is an awfully good idea that really does appeal to one part of the human heart. There's a killer in the human heart, but there's also a caring, merciful, wanting to live, understanding that other people want to live, part in the human heart. This is intended to mobilize it.
Okay. So tell me about your involvement in the organization IAGS.
And what it is.
And you have to give me the full name.
IAGS is the acronym for the International Association of Genocide Scholars. Living in Israel, I knew that I was too far away with the communication tools 20 years ago to be able to create an international organization of the now, in the 90s, beginning growing group of scholars from many fields who were studying genocide. I spoke with colleagues in 1993-ish. We had a Holocaust conference in Berlin. 4 of us had lunch together. Helen Fine, Robert Melson, Roger Smith, and myself. We came to a decision to create the International Association of Genocide Scholars. The 3 of them are Americans. America was to be the center of it, appropriately, at that time. In 1994, the organization was launched with Helen Fine, our first president. Subsequent years, all of us served as vice presidents, presidents, and the organization was on its way.
What's the importance of having an organization like that?
Raphael Lemkin was a Jewish lawyer in Poland. In the 30s, he proposed to the League of Nations a law against certain kinds of mass murder. It was turned down. In the 40s, virtually all of his family was wiped out in the Holocaust. Lemkin, a Jew, escaped, came to the United States, published a book on the Nazi destruction, and coined the word genocide. The minute you have a word, a concept, you organize greater potential for energy and thought to do something about it. Lemkin single-handedly led the development of the first law against genocide in the United Nations. What does an organization do? It brings together scholars in an area for which there was no known, defined field of study. It provides opportunities for talking, for sharing, for learning together, for doing research together, for developing action projects. One function of the IAGS has been to pass resolutions defining the validity of genocidal events, so that, as a very important example, early on, the association passed a resolution confirming totally that there was a genocide of the Armenians, as the Armenians and all of us with them have struggled against Turkish denials to this very day. The organization is a launching point for the new field. As I said earlier, there are now many, many masters and a beginning doctoral program in this specific field of studies.
So I want to bring you to 2007 and the Auschwitz seminar. And I want you to tell me about the significance of the Auschwitz seminar in 2007.
The Auschwitz seminar in 2007 was created as a pre-conference activity for the IAGS. The conference of IAGS was to be held in Sarajevo, Bosnia, a site of significant genocide. We preceded with an invitation to scholars from all nationalities to come for several days to Auschwitz. Imagine yourself in Auschwitz and the feelings that come up in you. Imagine yourself studying in Auschwitz for several days with colleagues from Asia, Europe, America, Israel. Our main guide at Auschwitz was a lovely man who grew up in the town of Oswiecim and told us how he and his family, quotation marks, did not know what was going on down the block. He's totally committed in caring and in moral concept to hurt and outrage at what was done at Auschwitz. We had, as continuous consulting leaders, two outstanding scholars, Michael Birnbaum, who was the assistant director of the United States Holocaust Museum in Washington, D.C. during its construction, and Deborah Lipstadt, who's a well-known Holocaust scholar who became the central figure in a very dramatic and potentially dangerous for all of us trial in London when she was sued by a Holocaust denier and anti-Semite. That's what the court ended up characterizing him, by the name of David Irving. They accompanied us through the several days. We studied together, and in a sense, we prayed together, and then we flew on to Sarajevo for the international conference of the International Association of Genocide Scholars, and that included a day at Srebrenica, where what is considered the worst genocidal massacre since World War II took place, where the Serbs separated 8,000 Bosnian men, took them and killed them all. Each year there's a memorial service which actually includes the burial of many of the bodies that are still being exhumed every year from mass graves in the area. We all participated in that.
I want to talk for a moment about the Yad Vashem conference that was held in 2009 on Rwanda and Holocaust survivors that met together. Can you tell me about this event at the Yad Vashem and its planning?
There was a very special event at Yad Vashem around 2009. The Jerusalem Post called it a milestone event. Yad Vashem is a wonderful institution dedicated to the history of the Holocaust. An unparalleled gift done in extremely good taste. But it has not seen itself broadening itself to relate in any meaningful way to the genocides of other peoples. Many of us are critical of that position. In 2009, there was a breakthrough initiative, and survivors of the Rwandan genocide were invited to Jerusalem, together with survivors of the Holocaust and genocide scholars. We all met for a good number of days at Yad Vashem. I remember warmly my pleasure at seeing, for the first time in my life, so many black faces in that auditorium at Yad Vashem that I know so well, to be occupied by Polish, Jewish, Israeli faces, all of us sitting together. The opening session was so memorable. There were 3 speakers. One was the chairman of the International Board of Yad Vashem, a wonderful political scientist and human being, Professor Shavach Weiss. Another one was the leader of the Rwandan delegation, an utterly beautiful woman inside and out, whose profession in Rwanda is nurse practitioner. Forget about doctors. She was the medical person for a whole region. All of her many children were killed in the genocide. Her husband was killed. Her family were wiped out. She led the delegation. She was the second speaker. I fell in love with her. I was the third speaker, representing the new emerging field of genocide scholarship and my identity as an Israeli citizen. It was a transformational event. It was followed by a Yad Vashem traditional conference on teaching about the Holocaust a few months later, where for the very, very, very first time, there was a session devoted to the subject of teaching genocide. Over the years, you heard one time after another rage at the mention of any genocide other than the Holocaust. This was an enormously important sequence of moves towards our embracing the human, the universal problem. We are also a lousy species, and we've got to do something about it. More people die of genocide than from any other health condition.
Can you talk about the way you research an encyclopedia of genocide?
Our Institute on the Holocaust and Genocide in Jerusalem undertook to develop the first encyclopedia on genocide. We did it with a publisher who is centered in America and in England, and we worked with the English office in Oxford. We invited a great many scholars to write in their emerging areas of expertise. We had a board of editors, 5 of us, who represented different disciplines, different ethnicities. Reuben Adalian, today the director of the Armenian museum that is being erected in Washington. Samuel Totten, the genocide scholar whom I described earlier as a man who is right now in Sudan bringing relief food to the Sudanese with his life on the line. The late Eric Markison, who was a traveling genocide scholar who went to scene after scene in the world to research, and who taught both in America and in Copenhagen. Mark Sherman, who's today chief librarian at the Truman Institute of the Hebrew University, was our bibliographic editor, and myself. Every one of us reviewed every single manuscript critically. We worked together as a team memorably. The encyclopedia ran into trouble. A few months before publication, the lawyer for the publisher advised that we were publishing material about certain deniers of the Holocaust that could lead to legal suits against us. And he advised that that material should be removed. My reply was, no. My further reply was, if you remove it, because publishers have a lot of power, I've learned it, I'll cancel the whole project. We negotiated. We arrived at an agreement that we would change this phrase and that phrase. I did it without compromising on the basic information, and I got my revenge. Since I was making changes, and by now they weren't looking, I added another line. I said about so-and-so, he denies being a denier. The encyclopedia was published in the UK and in England and went through a good number of printings, with a French edition published in France. We are very proud of it, very grateful for it.